Hey friends, how are you? I'm Nicole and this is Crimes with Cole. So, hello. How are you guys doing today? I hope you guys all are having an amazing day. I hope you guys have had a great week thus far and are ready for another crazy crime story. In today's case, we are going to be talking about the gruesome case of Stephen and Stoney Blair and the torture these children endured at the hands of the one woman who was supposed to be there to love, care, and protect them. This case does involve child abuse, so if you need to click out, now would be the time. And if not, then let's just get into today's case. While I was researching this case, it kept crossing my mind if this woman was truly mentally ill or if she is just plain evil. Mitchell Blair was a 35-year-old mother of four who lived in an apartment on the east side of Detroit. To all of those around her, she was just this loving, caring mother. But the sight of her that she was hiding would all come to light when movers were sent to her apartment to remove all of her belongings due to an eviction. On March 24th, 2015, a crew of men arrived at her apartment to carry out this eviction, except Mitchell was not there. She had been hiding at the neighbor's house. The men entered her apartment to remove all of her belongings. When they went to remove the deep freezer, the big Chester freezer that was sitting in the living room, they opened it up, and what they found were the bodies of 9-year-old Stephen and 13-year-old Stoney Blair. Now, going back years prior to this horrific day in 2015, Mitchell had pulled all of her children out of school and was a stay-at-home mom. They all lived in a 3-bedroom income-based apartment, and Mitchell was living off government assistance at this time. And during those years that they were home with her, child services had been called on her 2 times. Once in September of 2002 and another time in February of 2005. Her 4 children were never removed from her care. Both fathers were absent, although they claim Mitchell refused to let them see their kids. The 2 oldest kids were from one dad, and the 2 younger kids were from another dad. So that's leaving her to be the only provider and caregiver to these 4 kids. Mitchell would go on to mention how her aunt had been the only one to ever help her. You know, her aunt had helped her tremendously throughout her entire life. On August 2012, Mitchell's youngest son, Alex, had told her that his older brother, Stephen, had been being mean to him. At this time, Alex had been sitting down on the ground acting in an inappropriate manner, which caught Mitchell's attention. And this is when she had asked him, why are you doing that? Like, don't you know that that's nasty? Like, why are you doing that? Has someone done that to you? Like, what is causing you to act that way? Alex first replied, no one's ever done anything to me like that. But then he replied, yes, and said it was his older brother, Stephen. Mitchell had gone upstairs into the bedroom and asked Stephen why he was touching his little brother that way, that is inappropriate. And Stephen is saying, no, I haven't. Like, he's lying. While Alex, is behind his mom in the background saying, no, Mom, Stephen is lying. And all of this happened years prior to August 2012. August is just when Mitchell had found out about it. She asked Alex, why am I just now finding out about this? And Alex said, because they, referring to his older brother and sister, because remember, the 4 kids are homeschooled. So they're home with Mitchell all day. They don't leave. So when he says they, he's referring to his older brother and sister, that they would beat him up. So Mitchell turned her attention to Stephen and demand that he tell her the truth. Stephen admitted to touching on him, but that was it. There was nothing more. And Alex again shouts out in the background, "No, it's not." And at this point, Mitchell claims that she had just left the room because she just became so enraged with her son and his actions that he was taking towards his little brother. After learning this, it wasn't making sense to her. Stephen's story just wasn't making sense. So she took Alex back downstairs, trying to make sense of all of this, and proceeded to go back upstairs where Stephen was just crying and telling her over and over again, "I didn't do it. I didn't do it. I didn't do anything to Alex." And at this point, Mitchell decided to just punch her son, her 7-year-old son, repeatedly for what he had allegedly done to his little brother. When Stephen tells his mom that he is ready to tell the truth, this is when she stops punching him. Mitchell asked her son, "Did you do this to him?" And Stephen replies, "Yes." So Mitchell starts punching him again. Now, whether or not the abuse actually took place, that part is unknown between Stephen and Alex. It's also unknown if maybe this was some elaborate story that Mitchell amped up because she was dealing with her own childhood trauma, projecting it onto her children, almost blaming them for maybe what had happened to her as a child. That's unknown as well. So, all of this is very unknown. And if you watch clips of the interview that she does with, the detectives, it is you're not really sure. So it's unknown if Stephen really did any of these things to his little brother, or if he was just saying, "Yes, I did it," so that his mom would stop punching him repeatedly. Mitchell then took Stephen into the bathroom where she had poured hot water all over his genitals, continuing to hit him, kick him, smack him, tying a belt around his neck, choking him until he passed out, then putting him into a cold shower to wake him back up. And she even put a garbage bag over his head, making it hard for him to breathe. And for 2 weeks, for 14 days, this went on day after day. Mitchell did say on the second day she did not go into the bathroom because Stephen had been throwing up and she just couldn't bring herself to go in there. But days 3, 4, 5, 6, and so on, all the way up until day 14, she went into the bathroom to torture Stephen for what he had allegedly done to his little brother Alex. The last few days of Stephen's life, Mitchell said she had given him some soup and noticed later that day that his breathing had become shallow, but she knew he was still breathing because when she attempted to give CPR, she could smell the soup on his breath. Stephen ended up passing away on August 30th, 2012, due to all of the torture that he had endured. His body had essentially shut down. When Mitchell discovered that Stephen was gone, she wrapped his body up in his favorite blanket and put him in the Chester freezer that sat in the living room of the home. This is where he would stay for the next couple years, while the rest of them just carried on with their lives. And Alex then told his mom that his older sister Stoney had been inappropriate with him when he was younger as well. That she would take off his diaper and start, touching his behind. During the interview, Mitchell was asked, how did you not notice any of this? How didn't you know any of this was going on? How was it that you were able to stay home in a 3-bedroom apartment with your 4 children, none of them left, and yet you had no clue that your children were doing the alleged things that your youngest son claims that they were doing? And remember, Alex was in diapers during these alleged assaults. So detectives found it very interesting that he remembered such events in such details as young as he was. I mean, he would have had to have been around, let's say, 2 to 3, and he remembers that well of the details of what his older brother and sister allegedly did to him. She said that, they would bully Alex to keep him quiet. And then they would convince Alex to go play, one-on-one with them in the bedroom while the rest of the family was in, the living room watching TV. And that is how all of this abuse had happened. 9 months later, after the incident with Stephen, after Stephen had passed, around May of 2013, Mitchell had found out that Stoney had been acting inappropriately to Alex, because remember, Alex had told his mom that Stoney would take off his diaper and touch his behind. So Mitchell took it upon herself to confront her, asking her if she had touched her brother in an inappropriate manner. Stoney said, "No, I haven't." But Mitchell felt this rage building up in her, and she just got hot, like really hot, which is very similar to what someone goes into when they enter a blind rage, which, a blind rage only lasts momentarily, not for an extended period of time. So it didn't explain how Mitchell tortured Stephen for 2 weeks, or later would go on to torture her daughter for days. Mitchell said that she had walked up to Stoney, grabbing her by the throat, pinning her against the wall, asking her to tell her the truth. How long had she been doing this to her brother? And then she slammed her on the ground and kicked her continuously, and continued to ask her, how could you do that to your brother? I mean, this is a, 8, 9-year-old girl at the time, and she is just, oh my God. As Stoney was backing herself up after she had been slammed onto the ground, trying to catch her breath, Mitchell continued to question her about how she could do this and how long she had been doing this for. But it wasn't in reference to Alex at the time. It was in reference to Stephen. And Stoney had said, yes, she had been doing it to Stephen. Because remember, she's a little older than Stephen at this time. Now, at this time, during the interview, Mitchell's demeanor changed when detectives started asking her about Stoney. And it's almost like Mitchell intended to take Stoney's life, but felt bad for taking Stephen's life. After Mitchell had taken Stephen's life, that's when Alex started accusing Stoney of doing the same thing to him when he was little. So this is when, after she starts beating on Stoney, she discovers that Stoney not only was doing these inappropriate behaviors towards Alex, but she was also doing them towards Stephen. So Mitchell now feels like Stephen was a victim too, and felt bad that she had taken Stephen's life. So after Mitchell goes in, she grabs Stoney by the throat, she slams on the ground, and she starts questioning her. She then grabs a wooden stick. And this was a part of the bunk bed that was in the kids' room. It was like an extra piece maybe, or maybe a piece that had fallen off of the bunk bed. But it was a sturdy wooden stick. And she started hitting Stoney in the head with it. Naturally, her head started, to develop this like lump and bump and a welt on it, like a knot almost on her head from being hit with a wooden stick. Mitchell grabbed a towel out of the linen closet, and she put some ice in it, and then she had given it to Stoney to put on her head and told her, go lay down in bed, but she kept continuing to ask why would she have done this to Alex. He was just a baby. Why would you do that? And Stoney didn't reply. She was just quiet, laying there with a little ice pack on her head. So since Mitchell did not get a response from her, she started punching her repeatedly. For 2 days, Stoney laid in her bed with bare minimal food and water. Mitchell would take 2 small meals a day up to her and would get upset with her for even doing this because she found out that Stoney would steal food from Alex at the time, years prior when all of this was allegedly happening, that Stoney would steal his food when he was younger. She decreased Stoney's meals to once a day, and it was a small bowl of oatmeal and a cup of water. And for 2 weeks, Mitchell would go up to Stoney's room, sit in the corner, and just talk to her, questioning her on how she could do this. That, Alex is her little brother. She should have been protecting him, not abusing him. Mitchell wanted Stoney to give Alex a hug and say sorry, and Stoney said no, that Alex was just annoying and she wasn't sorry for what happened to him. Now, what Stoney is referencing what happened to him, I'm not really sure, but this sent Mitchell into a rage. And once again, she started beating Stoney again and again with that same wooden stick from the bunk bed. She left Stoney in her room for a few days while she was downstairs. And when she had finally decided to go back into Stoney's room, she said she asked Stoney to apologize to her brother for what she had done. Mitchell had punched Stoney once more. And at this time, Stoney had punched her mom back, supposedly, according to Mitchell during the interview, which is, odd for kids who are in an abusive household. But Mitchell said she had slammed her on the ground, grabbed her black t-shirt that was kind of like off on the side of the room, and wrapped it around Stoney's neck, choking her. She then grabbed a bag and held it over Stoney's mouth and nose, then proceeded to put it over her head while also putting her hand over her nose and mouth. So essentially, she's doing all she can to grab something to suffocate this little girl. And essentially, she did. She suffocated this little girl to death. And after Stoney had passed, Mitchell had put her body in the same freezer as Stephen, where it would stay until March 24th, 2015. Now, when the oldest daughter was forced to look at her lifeless brother and sister in the freezer, she just stood there and cried. Not even a week after Stoney's death, Mitchell has showed Alex the bodies in the freezer, where he just started to cry. And Mitchell asked him, "Why are you crying?" And he told her that she was going to get in trouble for that. During Mitchell's interview, after she had answered all of the questions asked, she started crying, asking the officer interrogating her to tell her kids that, she's fine and she isn't crying because they love her so much. She didn't want her kids to worry. She also wanted to let her aunt, the one who had done a tremendous amount for her entire life, she wanted to let her know that she loves her, and just seemed so concerned with just how her aunt and her children were going through this entire process. She was more concerned with how they were going to be affected compared to what she had done and compared to what she was getting ready to go through and how she was going to be affected. The officer questioning Mitchell also made it very clear that Stephen and Stoney had never confessed to this alleged abuse to Alex until they were brutally beaten. So maybe Alex had been fabricating a story. She just jumped to a conclusion that was a little far-fetched. But it's hard to say that these two children had confessed to this abuse when they were almost being forced to confess to this abuse that Mitchell claims happened. Now, a lot of people after this case made headlines wanted to know, how did these two kids go missing for years? And no one ever questioned it. But Mitchell would come up with these stories about how Stephen and Stoney had to go off and live with her aunt because they were just being bad and they weren't listening. And no one thought twice about it. These kids, all 4 of them, were pulled out of school and never went to see anyone or visit friends or family. And everyone just took the word of Mitchell, saying that she had to send her kids off when they were really in the freezer. I'm not sure how often the fathers had reached out to Mitchell, because during the court, Mitchell turns into this anger-filled woman. And the fathers obviously show up and they're very heartbroken that their children's lives have been taken at the hands of their mother. And she screams at them how, they never were around. But then the fathers would later come on to say that Mitchell would never let them come around. So, she was isolating these children for years. And although she had child services called on her twice prior to this incident, prior to, this happening, it's like no one ever really questioned it. None of her family, especially her aunt who had done so much, it's like she had never questioned, like, oh, how are all of the babies doing? Like, let me talk to some of them. Like, oh, their birthday's coming up. Let me swing by and have a cake or drop off a card or something. Now, during her trial, Mitchell came on to say that she had no regrets for doing what she did to those demons. That's what she would refer to her children as, is demons. She said she had no remorse and she was given life without parole for the death of her 2 children. How evil does one have to be to take the lives of her own 2 children and then have no remorse? It makes me question if there's an underlying mental illness or if she was just plain evil. I'm not sure. You guys will have to let me know what you think, because this case is just wild to me. It's wild. It's devastating. But it is absolutely wild how you can torment and torture two of your 4 children for weeks. So you guys will have to let me know what you think. But until next time, please remember to be safe, and I will see you then. Bye.